Our brain is designed for survival, which means that if it doesn't see something coming and it's caught off guard, it's going to go into survival mode, which means that our cute, normal mode of processing doesn't happen. And really, the area of the brain that gets any action in these more quote unquote traumatic moments is the emotional stuff. So, this is why if you can look back to a memory right now, big or small, conversation that you had yesterday, and it makes you like sick to your stomach, really emotional, it's because your brain didn't process it properly.
Hey, I'm Brooke Jean, therapist, recovering perfectionist, and struggling working mom on a mission to normalize normal. If you're an overwhelmed, high-achieving, and secretly anxious mama, struggling to balance it all and on the brink of burnout, you are in the right place. Here is where we talk about hard things like balancing work and family life, mental health, and how to navigate life-altering transitions. Nothing is too taboo here. In my conversations, I'll teach you how to let go of who you think you're supposed to be in order to create the life you've always wanted. Get ready to embrace your messy, shed the shoulds, and find freedom through a life unperfected. This is the Unperfected Pod. What is up, my lovelies? Brooke Jean here with the Unperfected Pod, and I am so excited to share this conversation with you this week. I've done something a little bit different, and instead of going outside of the house and interviewing people, we're going inside the house, and I am interviewing Miss Meghan Olson. She is a therapist on the Unperfected Team. She is a licensed clinical social worker, a certified brain health coach. She is an EMDR practitioner, and she is my ride or die in the business. And we talk all things like how did she decide to become a therapist, and what is brain health, and how does that relate to mental health, and what is in her mental health toolbox right now. We talk about her job history and how working in some really tough situations prepared her to be the incredible therapist she is today, and how she's been able to have good boundaries and not take all the things home. We talk about EMDR. What is EMDR? How do we use it? How does it help people? And so much more. I am so excited for you guys to get to know this special gem. I feel so incredibly grateful to have someone so talented, so real, so special on my team. So yeah, we are peeling back the curtain so you can see a little bit more behind the scenes, what we're doing and who we are and how we serve in a meaningful way. So enjoy. Make sure you grab a notepad and a pen, because there are so many juicy little tips in here that you are going to want not only for yourself, but for your loved ones. And like always, if you are loving this podcast, please share it with a friend. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating and a review, and let's get this free mental health resource into as many heads and hearts as possible. Enjoy. To the Unperfected Pod, where we normalize normal and find freedom through a life unperfected. What is up, my lovelies? Brooke Jean here, and I am just thrilled to have this very special guest on the podcast today. Miss Meghan Olson has been working for the Unperfected brand for over 2 years. She is a licensed clinical social worker. She is a certified brain health coach. She may have some additional credentials that I just can't even remember right now. She's got more credentials than me, but she is just an incredible therapist, an awesome person, has the best personality, and I wanted to bring her on the show so you could see behind the scenes, first of all, what is happening inside our business, because let me just tell you, magic and full-blown shit show at the same time simultaneously. But I want you guys to see how awesome this therapist on the team really is. And we're going to talk through, first of all, how did Meghan decide to become a therapist and why is she so passionate about mental health? We're going to talk about the brain health piece and why that's crucial for mental health. We're going to talk about EMDR, because she does EMDR, and so many of you ask questions. What is it? How does it help? And in my opinion, it's one of the most effective modalities out there. And we're just going to be silly, and we're just going to be ourselves. So, Miss Maggie Moo, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so excited. Hi.
Hi, people. Hello. Okay. So, first of all, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, you can see Megan's backdrop, which is her new condo that she just purchased as a single, ready to mingle. Okay, maybe not ready to mingle.
Look behind the wall. But like, hi everyone.
Hi,
Misha.
everyone.
Hi.
No, but as a girl boss, and I am just like obsessed with her new space. So,
My new back.
anyways, Megan, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dive into how the heck you decided to become a therapist. Let's do
Oh my
this.
gosh, yes. So fun. Hi everyone. I'm excited. I'm excited to be here. I work with the podcast so much. So this is so fun being on the other side of the podcast.
Yeah, you're usually behind the scenes listening to the things. Megan does, not only does she see clients, but she also does a lot of the behind the scenes things for the business. She listens to the podcast, she sends out the weekly email, she does all of the website pages,
Thanks.
she does
Yes.
social media, all of our graphics. Like she's just been amazing because those are the things that, let's just say, aren't in my zone of genius. Anywho, so yeah, you're on the other side of the mic today, my love.
Nine, which is so fun. So
Yes.
fun. But yeah, so like Brooke said, I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I'm big on brain health. I love working with health and wellness in general, but also helping healing the brain and how that translates to mental health and trauma and all of the things. But yeah, so I've been practicing now for how long? For about 6 years or so, which is really fun and crazy to think about. But yeah, I just love what I do and I love being able to help people and I love being able to show people what they're really expose true potential for people, not create it, have them recognize it. And it's my favorite thing ever. And I'm excited to be on the episode.
Yes. Okay, so how did you decide mental health, or how did you decide to become a therapist and a brain health coach? Like how did you decide to just get into the field in general?
It was a curveball for sure because I went into undergrad in college as undeclared. So I had no idea what I was doing at that point. And I was living it up, doing the dang thing as a new college student. But my advisor at the time, because I was undeclared, had suggested that I take a bunch of different types of classes to see like if I get a spark anywhere. And that's when I took psychology, like psychology, whatever it is, 101, just the basic psychology. And I hadn't taken it in high school before. That was my first like intro to psychology. And I just loved it. I thought it was so interesting and like fascinating. So after I took that class, I decided to declare psychology. And then at first it was terrifying because I went to CSU and it was technically a Bachelor of Science. And your girl's not a science type of gal normally. So I remember looking at the courses that I was going to have to take and being like, am I going to be able to do that? That looks a little terrifying. But yeah, I did psychology and I kept learning about all the different just fascinating things that come with being a psych major. Took forensic psychology, took neuroscience at one point, and I just have been really ever since then fascinated by the brain and people and how we feel and all of that sort of stuff. So then it just kind of skyrocketed from there. And then I ended up going social work in my master's program. So I didn't stick to psychology. And mostly because I just wanted to like have a good understanding of all the different things. And I wanted to like be able to set myself up. Because at the time I didn't necessarily know that I would be in counseling per se. But I was like, I really know what I'm gonna want to do. So I kind of want to like dabble and be able to set myself up to do really whatever I want to do. But then I went clinical social work and then had a lot of cool experiences in like undergrad, like internships and then grad school internships and practicums and all that sort of stuff. And then my first dabble in actual counseling was my advanced year practicum in grad school. And that was when I lived in Nashville and I worked at a domestic violence shelter and I got hired on as the basically family therapist. So it was for the mom side because there was single women there and then there was also families there. So moms and kids. So that was like my first deep dive into counseling, which
Wow, you
was
jumped right in, girl. You jumped right in. That's tough. I mean, ooh, yeah.
yes. It was obviously a lot, but it was such a good experience. And it was just my very first time like understanding, learning. And that was actually interesting to see like what counseling looks like in that kind of setting because it's very solution focused because it has to be. And for those of you at home, solution focused just means like we're pretty like to the point. Like what is it that we're coming in needing to switch up and fix and solve? And then we try to figure out a solution pretty quickly. And that was the basis of the DV shelter because people were in and out all the time. And so I didn't know like how often I would see people. I might see them once and they might be gone the next week. Like it was a really fascinating first jump into it. And really, I just kept the intensity going because then
I was going to say, is this before or after you worked for the suicide hotline?
listen, that was before.
Okay. So we do the shelter, and then what happens?
Where I graduate from grad school, and then my first like big girl job out of grad school was the crisis line.
Wow.
And at the time too, I did it very intentionally because I was like, listen, if I can get comfortable, like foundationally working with crisis and helping people through these moments that are really intense and terrifying and all the things, it's almost like we'll be able to figure it out in any other capacity.
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely.
things. Totally. So yeah, I was there for like 6 months and it was actually not as bad as you would think because I think most people are like, whoa, that sounds intense. And while it could be intense, the really like impactful thing about that place is I realized that 95% of the people that called in just needed to talk about what was going on and they were good to go. Truly. It was awesome.
I think that goes to show how important it is to normalize suicidal ideation. Everybody is so afraid to talk about having those thoughts or those feelings, and staying in the shame of it is what escalates it. So when 95% of the people who are pretty desperate at that moment to call a crisis hotline, when they stabilize and get to a better place just by talking, what does that indicate? That indicates that we need safe places to talk about what is pretty fucking normal in the human experience to have suicidal ideation. And that's why we talk about hard things online and on the podcast, and we try to normalize quote unquote normal, because it is normal to have a really desperate moment in your life. And thank God for those resources. And yeah, for you, how strategic and intelligent to have that as your foundation as a clinician, because nothing is going to feel quite as extreme. Also, you know what to look for. You can establish safety with all of your clients. Like, I feel so safe sending teenagers that maybe have demonstrated some signs and their parents are really worried. I feel so safe sending them to Meghan because she has this background clinical training. She knows how to assess and assess quickly. And she's also not afraid to jump into the deep end with what would otherwise be the scariest stuff. She's in there and comfortable with it. I want to talk a little bit about boundaries. Like, how did you, especially as a younger professional, or I don't even mean young like age, I mean like newer on the scene, less experienced. How did you not take that shit home, like with the families in the domestic violence shelter or the people that are calling in? How did you establish that, and how's that going for you now?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think that's what most people are always like, how are you doing this? And just like being a human, like, but I would say, I think that my brain in general is decent at compartmentalization in general. But I remember when I was in grad school, my first practicum that I worked at was at the Anschutz. There's a Veterans Community Living Center there at Fitzsimmons. So I was working with vets and they had co-occurring things going on because they had PTSD, but then they also had dementia and all of that sort of stuff. But I had met a social worker who was a hospice social worker there. And this is when I was still in training and I was just picking her brain about it, because a hospice social worker, most people have the same thing where they're like, that's so sad. Like, why would you want to do that? And explaining to me, she's like, listen, I'm very good at compartmentalizing because I remember like, hey, that's not mine to take on. That's not my grandpa. This isn't my family. This isn't my grief. And she would kind of separate herself from it in that way. And I was like, fascinating. And then she kind of reframed it to be like, I'm there in these final moments with people and bringing them a sense of peace, like right before they exit this world, which is really powerful and cool. But most people don't think about it that way. And then so same kind of thing where people are like, well, wow, you must have heard really sad shit all the time. And you must have, and still being a therapist, it must be really like hard hearing all this information all the time, which it can be. But I always reframe that too to say like, number one, yes, it's not my life, my grandpa, my whatever. But at the other side of it too is I like to think about it as more so helping people get better, helping people take power back, helping people through these moments and turn things around and all of that. So yeah, probably a combination of meeting her and my brain just being able to kind of do that anyway, because I always tell my clients too, like, I get it when we get into a space of like not wanting to be vulnerable, because my personality is very much not vulnerable. And if anybody knows the Enneagram, you've talked about it on the podcast before, but I'm an 8, for those of you who know what that means, which means that she's not the most vulnerable person. So I let people know that, because I'm like, I get it. I get that it's hard and it's terrifying for sure. But I think that partially is why it's like easier for me to compartmentalize. But yeah, I think about it of helping people through these hard moments and helping them get better versus just being like sucked into this sadness. Because I'm like, we don't have to necessarily view it like that.
No, it is such a sacred process. I say the same thing to people all the time. They're like, how do you sit and listen to people complain all day? I'm like, I don't sit and listen to people complain. I get to sit and witness really brave souls open up their like biggest wounds, look at them, heal through them, transform them, and integrate and become a badass. And it is an honor and a privilege to witness these transformations. Do we sometimes complain about our partners and our kids and, you know, all the shit? Sure. But we always link it to something much deeper, and the work is sacred. And it is hard, and you do need boundaries, but it is sacred. And so I don't see it as, God, we're like conditioned, I feel like, especially as women. Here comes the conditioning talk again. We're conditioned to feel like our problems are a burden. So we don't want to talk to others about it because it's a burden. And it's like, you think you're burdening your therapist. That's how deeply ingrained this is. No, you're not. It's not a burden to us. At least good therapists, it's not a burden to us at all. But okay, but you said something honest, that you actually struggle with vulnerability. How do you then get people to open up and be vulnerable with you if it's something that you personally struggle with? Say more about that process.
Yes.
Because I also think people put us as therapists on a pedestal. Like,
Oh, God,
oh,
yeah.
Brooke must be like so emotionally stable because she's a therapist. Bitch.
Listen.
Goodbye. Or, you know, they need to be like behaved well, or they need to be vulnerable or so comfortable with their feelings. And it's like, you guys, take us right off that pedestal. We are just human beings like you navigating this messy life alongside of you. We have our flaws, we have our struggles. Now, one thing I say is different about us is we're willing to look at them and work on them, but do not think that we're not messy human beings as well. So how do you work through that? And also, you know, how does it help or hinder people opening up to you?
And a lot, what I've noticed is more than anything, it helps people open up, because like it's this like eye-opening thing of like, oh, okay, yeah, so you're not like this crazy person on this pedestal that like has it all together. And yes, we normalize normal for a reason. And so I'm always talking to people about this, and I like talk about how I have anxiety and talk about how I have ADHD tendencies and all of these things. But
Tendencies.
I've never been formally diagnosed. I've never been formally so, like,
Oh, I love you. I love you. Okay, so you work through it by just calling it out, like saying, I struggle with vulnerability, I have anxiety, I have ADD, and that probably
yes.
makes them find you approachable and relatable.
Yes. And I also make sure that I preach, like, listen, the biggest thing when it comes to mental health and helping ourselves is figuring out what works for us specifically. Because I think a lot of people, and you've probably experienced this, have this like vision of what we're supposed to be doing. And an example of this is like, I had a girl come to me once from Denver Springs or a place like that that was an inpatient situation. And in order to leave the inpatient situation, she had to do like a treatment plan type of thing, write down her coping skills, whatever. And she came into me and she was like, so yeah, I wrote down, you know, music, drawing. And she was like, I effing hate drawing. And I was like, sis. And this is the problem, because everyone's like, we're supposed to just be fixed by coloring, you know, or whatever. And I'm like, you got to figure out what works best for you. And when it comes to vulnerability specifically, I tell people, like, you don't have to scream this from the rooftops if that's not the vibe for you. That's okay. You don't have to be comfortable crying in front of people. You don't have to be comfortable crying at all. But it's about finding like what's the best method for you. So for me specifically, I process my emotions solo dolo. Like, I'm still not a person that loves to cry in front of other people and all of that. But I figured out how to look at my emotions honestly and clearly and like feel them instead of pushing away, push them to the side, push them down, push them wherever. And I do so in my own way. Like I like to do it by myself still. I do my own things with that. And then there's other people that like to talk through it with people, and that's cool. But it's like, that's a big piece of it too, where I say, you got to figure out what works for you specifically. And it doesn't look like screaming from the rooftops that you're sad. Like that's not what processing has to look like. Because I think that intimidates people, but we have to find our own method. We just can't ignore them. That's my big takeaway. Don't you be ignoring those feels, girlfriend.
Nope, not unless you want them to bubble up as something else.
1000%.
Like, I don't know, autoimmune diseases and rage and
Ugh.
maladaptive patterns and addictions and all the things. Yeah, it's alarming to me how many people still apologize for crying in my presence. And I'm like,
Wild.
first of all, sweetie, do you know me? Because I cry like every day over something, for real. I could be crying because I'm overwhelmed. I could be crying because the commercial just hit different. I could be crying because I miss my kids or I'm over my kids. Like water comes out of my head almost every day. And P.S., we cry in therapy, honey. That's what we do. We come
Yes.
to release, but you don't have to. You don't have to feel comfortable with it. And this is what people don't understand about therapy too, is you finding the strength and the courage to feel, to cry and maybe even eventually feel okay with it. Having that experience interpersonally with us as your therapist in a safe container that's confidential, where we cry all the time, that prepares you to then go out into the world and know how to manage your feelings and express your feelings. Building relationship with your therapist, learning how to trust them, learning how to communicate, learning how to get feedback, learning how to say, I'm struggling. Learning to do that in this context is on purpose to help you learn how to do that out in the real world. And I think people miss that that's such a crucial and critical piece of what we're doing.
Yes.
Is we're just training our brain and bodies how to be okay with who we are and what is happening in our body. And then how do we work with it, release it, express it in ways that are congruent with who we authentically are. And you're absolutely right. Healing is not a one size fits all. Your mental health toolbox is not a one size fits all. I released an episode that shared all of what's in my current mental health toolbox, and it can be different from anyone else's. But Megan, for you as a therapist, what are your like top 3 go-to tools in your mental health toolbox right now?
Well, so it started out as simple, and it's so funny because it's so simple, but it's so real, because I used to be this person that, again, I'm not very vulnerable naturally, all that sort of stuff. So it all started with me first acknowledging and just naming the things that I was feeling. Was wild. And it started off me sitting in my bed, and literally all I did was go, okay, I feel sad.
How do you know what the feelings are? Because we do only identify like 5 feelings: sad, happy, scared. Especially when you're working with like the younger clients, maybe the tweens or the teens, but really all of us, like we're all a little stunted. What is your like, where do you know what the feelings are? How do you know what the feelings are?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it is hard, and it is a lot of times people don't even know how to pinpoint what they're feeling. I've used resources before that are technically, this therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy has a lot of resources that look at like a list of specific emotions that I often give to clients all the time. And it's just meant to be like, hey, just read that list and see what sticks and see what you relate to and see what you're like, oh shit, yeah. Because under even the sadness bubble, there's a million things that can make us sad. Like, are you lonely? Are you disappointed? Are you hurt? Are you all these different things? So it's okay to utilize other resources. Now, I've gotten better with that because I've gotten those resources and all that sort of stuff. And I also got in the habit too of practicing the 90-second rule from Joan Rosenberg. That is basically, looking at anxiety and these heavy emotions a little bit differently. But she talks about how things like anxiety are oftentimes kind of a manifestation of something deeper. And so I'll talk to people about this because I feel like a lot of times, even in myself, like the things that come out easier, anxiety and anger, cis can go red zone easy, or especially when I was younger.
Yep. Cis spends a good 25% of her life in the red zone, even with all the tools.
Zone. Yeah, like that just tends to come out easier. And for a lot of people, it comes out easier because it's just not as vulnerable. Like going through a breakup, it's easier to be like, he was that worse, he did this, that, the other, instead of saying, oh no, I'm just sad that this person left.
And I feel
But
rejected and abandoned.
rejected, I feel all these things. Yeah, I feel lonely, I feel dismissed, I feel whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so Joan Rosenberg talks about this of like, if we were to kind of unpack that a little bit further. And so I talk to people of, okay, if we know that anxiety comes out easily for you and things like anger, irritation, frustration, relating to these easier, quote unquote,
Blame, shame, these are all the
like,
go-tos.
yes, if we were to name one other emotion that's here, that's not relating to anxiety or anger at all, this is what I challenge people to do. I'm like, the rule is you have to name one other emotion that's present, that's not linked to those two things. What might that be? And it's hard because people are like, oh, I don't know. Like, okay, I really have to think about it. But are you feeling hurt? Are you feeling disappointed? Are you feeling vulnerable? Are you feeling rejected? Are you feeling all these things? Because more often than not, there is something deeper at the root of it. And then it just translates in this cute little way that's anger, rage, anxiety, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, so I would say a big part of it is really, as you always talk about, slowing down a little bit, carving out 10 minutes to just reflect and really ask yourself these questions of, okay, other than anxiety, other than anger, other than the thing that pops out wicked easy for me, what else might be here that I haven't really acknowledged or attention to? And again, we have these lists and whatever that are super helpful with specific emotions that can just help like get your brain going and identifying and remembering how many different emotions we experience as humans. We sum it up in a couple and call it a day. Like, we're very complex beings. So
I
yeah,
don't
I
think
like to.
people realize the power of just naming the emotion. It puts distance between the experience of it and your response to it, and you take your power back instead of the emotion driving the ship, driving the show. By naming it, you're putting a spotlight on it, like, I see you, I see you. And then when you don't shame yourself for it, you normalize it, you breathe through it, you do whatever you do to move it through your body. It's no longer like subconsciously right here blinding you from seeing anything else. So there is actually so much therapeutic movement in just identifying and naming and acknowledging feelings. That is something we could be helping our children with, our teenagers with, and ourselves with. That would be huge for their overall mental health. Stop
1000.
stuffing them down. Okay, we
Yeah.
have to stop telling our kids that they can't cry or boys don't cry or quit crying, because when they stuff those feelings, friends, it comes out in their behavior. And then they get in
Right.
trouble for their behavior, so they have to stuff their feelings and their behavior. And this is really, truly problematic. And while my kids' cries trigger me just like the next one, I've really learned to regulate my nervous system so I can tolerate the cries when they happen, because I don't want to give the message that we stuff feelings and feelings are bad, because I know where that gets us. And I had to spend how many years in therapy learning how to undo that and feel my
Oh,
feelings and identify them and work through them. Okay, so the first thing in your mental health toolbox is acknowledging, naming, and feeling your feelings. Give us two more.
okay. And I will say this kind of goes in with the first one, but it's super helpful. And with something that's been super helpful for me in general as a person, again, it's not crazy vulnerable all the time and used to not even look at sadness, period, as a teenager, you know? And I talk to clients about this, but I like to help people and for myself recognize it as like, hey, instead of shaming myself for this feeling that I feel, because a lot of us do tend to gaslight ourselves without realizing it, telling ourselves we shouldn't be feeling what we're feeling and all of that. I look at it from a screen standpoint of like, listen, this is what's here. This feeling has arisen for whatever reason, whether that's a trauma response or a defense mechanism or whatever. But there's a
Trigger.
reason it's come. Yes, there's a reason that's just come to the surface. And we don't have to argue that. Like, we don't have to talk ourselves out of it or feel like that's weird because and we have science to back this stuff up. Like, the stuff comes up for a reason. And the more that you understand the reasons and learn about your brain and learn about your trauma and learn about your experiences and just understand how the brain works of like why it adopts these things or whatever, the more we can again like take some of that heat off and be like, hey, it's all good. Like, I feel sad, so what? I feel whatever, so what? Like, it's here. And let's help ourselves through it instead of trying to pretend like it's wrong. Or
Totally.
yeah. So
Totally.
that kind of goes hand in hand with that. But I remind myself of that too, of like, It's all good. I know sadness isn't comfortable for anybody. Vulnerability is not comfortable for anybody. Shame, grief, all the things are awful. We know this. But the second we start to normalize it, like, it's okay that I'm feeling it, it makes it a lot easier to kind of move
Oh
through.
my God. Yes, because okay, so you're having the feeling, like let's say you have anxiety, and which we also know is a cover up for other feelings, but then you get upset that you have the anxiety again. So you have the feeling, and then you have your feeling about the feeling, which perpetuates the original feeling. We call that in acceptance and commitment therapy having the struggle switch on. It's like, I feel anger, and now I feel shame that I feel anger. I feel anxiety and I feel fear that I'm going to have anxiety again or a panic attack again. I feel sadness and I feel guilt that I'm not more happy with this life I've created. I feel guilt and then I feel disappointed that I haven't shed the guilt. And it's like, friends, there's so much power in peeling back that top layer. There's the feeling, let it be. Breathe into it. No shame, no judgment. But when you have a feeling about the feeling, you're perpetuating the feeling. That struggle switch is on, honey. Turn her off. Turn her off. We are
Totally.
human beings designed to feel a wide range of feelings. It doesn't say anything about who you are as a person.
No,
So I love
literally.
that. Okay,
Yeah.
what's the third one?
Then on just a coping skills regulation front, like, I just tune into what I might be needing in a moment. Like, I love fitness a lot. I like to relieve stress in that way. That's a very common thing that I do often, just to get my brain right, all that sort of
Movement.
stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna feel like that's like your main go-to is you make sure that you get your movement in. Like,
Yes.
I'm so impressed with you because you are committed to that, Shiza, more than most people I know. So what does exercise and movement do for you and mental health and just in general? Because guys, when we see clients, especially the younger ones, they come in for depression and
Right.
Megan's like, well, are we moving our body? Are we eating like shit? Are we going outside? Are we connected to friends? And these are things that you as a parent have been teaching your kid their whole lives. But when they hear that coaching, when they hear
Yeah.
that message from Megan, it hits them different. They start like, oh, maybe I do need to move my body. So anyways, what does movement do for you and what does it do for mental health? Because that is
Yeah.
actually so key to, I feel like, the treatment that you give your clients is you look
Yes.
at that brain health stuff first before
Right.
we're digging into deeper
Right.
things or
Yeah. I
other
kind of like to
treatment
think about it.
modalities. Hmm.
Yeah. I like to think about it first and foremost. Are we getting our basic needs met, mama? And the thing with movement is, for me, it's just a very good stress reliever, and I just feel good. The endorphins, all that sort of stuff after. I'm just like, feel accomplished. Feel like I got my ducks in a row, gets my energy right, all that sort of stuff. But in general, when it comes to why we talk about movement, like, F the aesthetics of it all. Most people think that they have to be working out for dumb reasons that aren't actually what we're talking about. But basically, movement helps promote blood flow to the brain. Now, blood is what makes our brain work at all. It fuels our brain, it carries glucose and oxygen. So that's very much what feeds our brain to just work in general. And a lot of times, anxiety, ADHD, depression, like neurobehavioral type things that we experience can be linked to not getting enough blood flow to your brain. So, really fix the best way to get more blood flow going is that. And then you can help your brain like heal and actually work properly. And so that's kind of the big reason that we even talk about it. And you talk about the stress cycle and all that sort of stuff, but from a brain health standpoint, it's very much linked to physiologically getting brain fuel. And research has shown, and SPEC scans and Dr. Daniel Amen and all this research has shown that exercise goes hand in hand, equals out to antidepressants in terms of effectiveness on the brain after scanning a bunch of brains and just seeing what these things do. So yeah, super important. And again, that could be a walk, that could be yoga, that could be, there's so many different ways. And I think people get kind of tripped up by that. And if you are the type of person too that has struggled with like eating disorders and that sort of stuff and your relationship with exercise and all of that, that's where you can get that extra TLC for sure to help figure out how can we do this in a way that's meant to be loving instead of meant to be you hating yourself and trying to like
Punishing.
fix wrong, punishing yourself. Right. Right. And sometimes we need that extra support through that, and that's totally okay. But movement looks like a lot of things. And if you think about it that way of like, hey, this is just feeding my brain. That's all I'm doing. I'm getting more blood going instead of
Yeah,
it.
you
Yeah.
taught me all about the blood. I didn't really know much about, what our brain needs to
Yeah.
function properly and how crucial blood flow was. And that is a foundation to everything else, right? It's like we need to make sure those basic needs are met, that our brain is being treated like the precious organ it is. Because if it's not getting enough blood flow, that's where some of these ailments might be coming in. And when we're doing those things and we can rule those things out, then we can look at, other modalities and traumas and all that other stuff. And also, for some people though, like for me in particular, like when I'm really depressed, I know the things I need to do to help me and to get that blood flow going. But sometimes you're so depressed, you can't. And that's where
Right.
medication came in for me. It's like, I need the medication to then get my butt out and walk every day. But now I'm doing both and I'm feeling better. But a lot of times, you guys, when we get people looking at these basic needs, talking about their feelings and moving their bodies, lots of that depression and anxiety starts to fall away. And so we love to start there. And I also want to say, if you guys don't know who Dr. Daniel Amen, Amen is, he's amazing. And that's who certified his program, is where Meghan got her brain health certification. So love him, love the content he puts out online, love the way that he's passionate about brain health. He doesn't call it mental health, he calls it brain health, which I think is cool because it removes the stigma. I still use mental health so people really understand what we're talking about. But yeah, brain health is really important. And especially when we're working with those younger clients that just think we're being silly by talking about nutrition and movement and socialization. They think we're just being annoying parents. Having Meghan come in and really educate them on, no, this is what's happening in your brain and this is what might be lacking and this is why you might be feeling depressed or anxious or, whatever it is. So it's really important. Okay, so acknowledging your feelings, not having any shame or judgment around your feelings, and then movement, fitness, exercise, way to move that through the body. And she did mention the stress cycle, so I want to make sure I hit on that. So Megan's saying that she moves as a way to keep her blood flow to the brain and feel good. The other thing, so there's a really incredible book called Burnout, and it talks about how, and you working mamas that are listening, you probably understand a little bit about a burnout. Burnout isn't because we're doing too many things. Burnout is because we're stuck in a physiological emotional response in our body, a stress response. So stress is like we have the stressors come in through our receptors, and then we have a physiological response that we label stress, overwhelm, anxiety. And if we don't move that physiological response out of our body, it gets stuck and we start carrying yesterday's stress into today and today's into tomorrow, and that becomes burnout. And you want to know so they talk about we need to be completing a stress cycle every single day, and the fastest and most efficient way to do that is 20 minutes of movement, and it can be a brisk walk. That is why you see me on Instagram walking, because I got to get that 20 to 45 minute walk in every day to close my stress cycle. But it also helps with depression, but it also gets vitamin D, but it also releases endorphins. So like from a mental health standpoint, if there is one thing you do different to help yourself or your kids or your families do, move your body 20 minutes a day. There's so many benefits and they're all connected. So anyways, Burnout is an excellent book. And that's when she mentioned the stress cycle. That's what she's talking about.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
insane.
Okay, let's pivot because I want to keep us on time, but I want to make sure we talk about EMDR.
Yes, 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 yes.
So, EMDR and brain spotting and somatic experiencing are, in my professional opinion, the most effective trauma healing modalities because they look at the brain and the body. And we now know trauma is stored in our tissues, it's stored in our body. And so I do brain spotting. Meghan does EMDR. Meghan, tell us, first of all, what is EMDR, and then like how can it help? How can it help the people?
Gosh, yes, this is my favorite thing to inform people about. I love EMDR. So yeah, EMDR is known for being in trauma therapy. And first things first, one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is kind of just what trauma is in general, because people think that trauma is just those big moments like you went through an abusive childhood, you've been in an auto accident, like these very obvious like big moments.
Or like people
But it,
still think you have to go to war to have PTSD. And I'm like,
yeah,
okay, Those
Right.
folks for sure have complex PTSD, but it's
Right.
often so much more insidious than that, isn't it?
Yes, the more common, and of course, yeah, everyone, at the end of the day, everyone's going to go through trauma at some point, and that's what people don't realize because they think it's these big moments only. And while yes, it's these big moments, more often than not, the most common traumas are like the day-to-day conversations that we have, these moments between our family, like all of that. And the biggest thing that you can think about with trauma is essentially a moment of time that our brain is caught off guard and something happens that our brain wasn't expecting. And so when our brain processes something the right way, both sides of the brain are engaged in that. It has a lovely little method of processing things and us remembering things and all of that. And I'll kind of explain this all in layman's terms because it gets sciencey and, mumbo jumbo. But basically, when we're caught off guard, our brain is designed for survival, which means that if it doesn't see something coming and it's caught off guard, it's going to go, whoa, what are we doing? And go into survival mode, which means that our cute normal mode of processing doesn't happen. And really, the area of the brain that gets any action in these more quote unquote traumatic moments is the emotional stuff. So, this is why if you can look back to a memory right now, big or small, conversation that you had yesterday, and it makes you like sick to your stomach, really emotional, it's because your brain didn't process it properly because it caught your brain off guard. So, in general, EMDR is a really amazing treatment that helps us to reprocess these moments that we didn't get to do the right way the first time. And we reprocess it and make sure we're doing it the right way this time by using what's called bilateral stimulation, which is a really fancy way of saying that we're lighting up all areas that we need lit up instead of just the, yes, we're making sure that everything's online just like it was supposed to be the first time. And bilateral stimulation looks like a lot of different things. So I think this is where people are curious about EMDR or like have some experience but don't know what it is. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Again, a bunch of fancy words, but eye movements, tracking your eyeballs back and forth was the first like known style of lighting up both sides of your brain. And so now we've turned more into like tapping on both sides of the body and that sort of stuff. And it's again, and bilateral music and all of that. Yeah, lighting up both sides of your brain. But if you've had any experience with a light bar, this is what I get more often than not. Like people going, is that the thing with the light bar? And there's a lot of therapists that do have a bar of light that has this light that tracks back and forth. And that's like what that's meant to be, helping to light up your brain. People just don't know. But the other cool thing too about the way that I was trained in EMDR is standardly it's like, yeah, we have these big moments that we let our brain reprocess. And this can be the really huge trauma moments or whatever moments you're having flashbacks to and that sort of stuff. But the EMDR that I was trained in is called somatic and attachment focused. So it kind of is a cool option because we can work backwards where it's like, okay, I more often than not have people think of three things, like symptoms that you have, patterns you notice in yourself, that if they were gone tomorrow, your life would be significantly better. Kind of go through this whole rabbit hole of like starting with these three, we pinpoint one that we want to focus on, and then we end up getting to this core thing that's called the negative cognition, which this is the shit that people are carrying every damn day and don't realize it. And they wonder why they're depressed. They wonder why they're anxious. But oftentimes there's this root cognition, conditioned belief that we get from our life experiences, from how we were raised, from our conversations, from whatever, that tell us something unhelpful. Like tell us, I'm not worthy enough. I'm not deserving. I'm not good enough. I'm too much. I'm too little. I'm all these things. And get to the nitty gritty of that in EMDR. And then we link that feeling back to significant moments that you might not even realize are significant, which is wild.
And that's amazing because a lot of people are like, do I need to remember my trauma? What if I don't remember it? What if I don't think anything was traumatizing? And it's like, no, you don't. You can say, I don't know why I'm binge eating. I don't know why I'm raging. I don't know why I'm texting my ex. I don't know why I'm fixated on this. And then you start there and you work your way to the trauma. And sometimes that's a less invasive way for people to go. Other times people will come and they'll say, I'm having nightmares. I'm having PTSD symptoms of like a specific trauma, and I need this out of my brain and out of my nervous system. And you can jump into that and start there too. But I like the flexibility in the modality.
I love the flexibility of it all because, yeah, a lot of us are just carrying these negative cognitions every day and don't realize it. And then it's like, that makes sense to me that you're feeling depressed every day, or that makes sense to me that you're anxious if every day you're just deep down feeling like you're not good enough.
No, and here's where I feel like it gets really juicy. So you come in to do some EMDR or some brain spotting to get to the root of your conditioned belief that's not healthy. Like, I'm a piece of shit. I'm bad. I'm disgusting. I'm too big, too much, whatever it is. You start to work through that in the EMDR and the brain spotting. But anytime you're trying to change your brain and engage in what is neuroplasticity, it needs repetition and emotional intensity. So you come in, you do your weekly EMDR with Meghan, and then in between sessions, you are reframing those thoughts over and over. You write down, I deserve love on a sticky note where your subconscious mind sees it over and over. You journal about it. You meditate on it. You visualize on it. You imagine what you will look and feel and be like when you no longer have this belief. And between the EMDR or the brain spotting and then that like reprogramming work, guys, this is how we really truly change the fucking brain. This is how we release trauma out of our nervous system. Our brains and our bodies want to get back to homeostasis. They don't want to carry this. And they're also extraordinarily intuitive and know how to heal themselves with a little bit of guidance like EMDR. The brain and body knows what to do. And so when people really want to see change and results quicker, I always recommend that EMDR and that brain spotting because, in my opinion, personally and professionally, and it's not an overnight fix because nothing is, so I want to be careful with my words here, but you will see more growth and healing and movement when you engage in some of these deeper modalities.
Yes, they're so incredible. Yeah, because I get to the root of stuff that we don't realize is there, which is amazing and awesome. And I do it all the time and I love it. So highly recommend for sure.
Love it.
Love.
Okay, well, listen, I just looked at the clock and it was 44:44. So, hey, yo. Hey. But what I want to wrap up, I want to first thank you, Meghan, for number one, just being a radical human being that makes me laugh almost every day. But for just bringing the passion that you bring to healing people and to your clients and to your work and to our brand. Like, I feel so proud of what we're creating and the help that we're offering, whether it is through counseling or mental health coaching or the groups, the programs, all the things that we do, they come from such a heart-led place. And I'm just so grateful to have someone like you doing this work with me in the world. And just so you guys know, it took me 6 years to hire someone because she picky, but Meghan is the right fit and she's incredible. And I'm so grateful for you. And also, Meghan does have a couple of openings in her calendar right now. So if you or your kiddo or someone you know would benefit from some counseling, some EMDR, some mental health coaching, some brain health coaching, we're going to put her Calendly link in the show notes to book a free 30-minute consult. But yeah, hit her up before she gets full, my loves, because now with everyone going back to school, things are already kind of rolling in really fast. But Meghan, thank you for being here today. Thank you for being ride or die on this unperfected journey. And thank you for also doing so much behind the scenes. I so appreciate you.
Yes, thanks for having fun time.
Yes, honey. And for everybody else that's listening, thank you guys for tuning in. I hope that you found something in this conversation that you can put in your toolkit to help you and your people that you love. And we will see you same time, same place next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening to the Unperfected Pod. I hope this episode helped you feel a little less alone and a little more inspired to be you. If you like what we're doing here, I would so appreciate that you subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. If you do, share the episode on Instagram and tag me at Brooke Jean Unperfected to enter to win a 1-to-1 laser coaching session. Also, feel free to join me in my private Facebook community, Mommy's Mental Health Matters, where we continue the conversation. Thanks again for being here and see you in next week's episode.